Tate had absolutely no shame. As he stood there mooning the Christmas tree and every guest in the room, his relatives, especially his mother, immediately turned away in horror. Tate, however, simply smiled, looking as though he had accomplished exactly what he had set out to do. He loved shocking people. The more awkward, embarrassing, or inappropriate the situation became, the more amused he was, especially during his teenage years and early adulthood. If he could leave a room speechless, he considered it a success. Poor Susie happened to be directly in the line of fire as Tate's privates hung at her eye level. She instantly turned her head away, groaning, "Oh, for heaven's sake, Tate." Tate shoved his pants down further, the fabric sliding over his hips until they bunched at mid-thigh. His bare ass caught every glint from the Christmas tree lights, the smooth pale skin stretching tight over firm muscle. The cleft between his cheeks parted slightly with the motion, and the reflections in the dozens of shiny ornaments scattered his exposed rear across the room in warped, glittering duplicates. Every bauble showed a different angle of his spread ass cheeks. Talia whipped her head to the side, cheeks flushing as she stared at the wall. Noah kept his gaze locked on the hardwood floor, shoulders rigid. Andrew's smirk widened, eyes flicking openly over the display. Susie made a loud gagging sound, hand clamped over her mouth while her eyes bulged at the full frontal and rear view. Tate's uncles sat frozen, faces twisted in open disgust and shame as they watched their nephew stand there, ass completely exposed. Without any underwear, Tate's whole crotch hung free. Tate's private swung heavy and soft between his legs. From behind, the spread of his ass left the dark line of his crack fully visible. Susie and Andrew saw every inch front and back, his genitals on complete display while the family stared in stunned silence. Tate stood motionless for a long moment, pants trapped around his thighs, letting the sight sink in. His bare ass flexed again, cheeks parting wider as he shifted his weight, the reflections multiplying the view in every ornament. The uncles muttered under their breath, one turning away entirely. Talia pressed a hand to her temple. Noah's breathing stayed shallow, eyes never lifting from the floor. Susie gagged again, louder this time, while Andrew's gaze lingered without shame. The room stayed thick with tension as Tate remained there, bare from the waist down. Reflections danced across the ornaments, capturing every detail of his naked lower half in endless distorted copies. No one moved. The family simply absorbed the sight of Tate standing proud and unashamed, pants halfway down, everything on display in the middle of the Christmas gathering. Talia turned her head sharply, looking away with a sharp intake of breath. Noah kept his eyes fixed on the floor, jaw tight. Andrew smirked but said nothing. Susie gagged audibly, one hand flying up to cover her mouth as her eyes widened at the full view. Tate's uncles stared at their nephew with open shame, faces darkening. Tate wore nothing underneath. The pants hung low on his thigh. Susie and Andrew saw every detail. Tate stood there without a hint of hesitation, pants bunched at mid-thigh, bare ass and genitals fully visible to the entire family gathering. Everyone immediately realized that Tate had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to get a reaction. Noah quickly looked away, already knowing Tate had crossed into his usual territory of inappropriate humor. "Tate," Noah said, shaking his head. The room filled with shocked reactions, laughter and disbelief. Susie covered her face, laughing despite herself. "You seriously did not just do that?" Tate looked completely satisfied with himself, as if he had accomplished exactly what he wanted. Noah quickly looked to the floor because Tate wasn't wearing any underwear, and only Tate could do something so inappropriate and make people laugh at the same time. Everyone knew Tate had a strange talent for turning ordinary moments into unforgettable stories. It was embarrassing. It was ridiculous. But somehow it was completely Tate. Noah had liked what he had seen, but he quickly looked away out of embarrassment as his face completely turned pink. He blushed, and despite the awkwardness of the moment, he looked like he was having the best time of the day. Talia immediately noticed what was happening. "Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, pull up your pants immediately, there are women present." Tate looked over with a completely innocent expression. "Yes, mother," Tate said sarcastically. He pulled his pants up and fixed his clothing, still looking far too pleased with himself. "Well, ladies, gentlemen, pervs, voyeurs, and wannabes, you got to see something for free," Tate joked. Several people shook their heads, laughing and groaning at the same time. Noah covered his face for a moment. "Only you, Tate, would be so crude." Tate smiled as he had just delivered the greatest performance of the evening. "When are we going to eat?" Tate asked. "I'm famished." He looked around dramatically. "All of this strutting around like the cock of the walk is making me hungry." Talia sighed, but there was a small smile on her face. Even when Tate was being completely ridiculous, he somehow managed to turn a quiet Christmas gathering into a story everyone would remember. Tate smiled his evil little mischievous grin, clearly enjoying the reaction he had created. He looked around the room, completely pleased with himself. "If any of you ladies liked what you saw tonight, my coat is the blue one over there," Tate said. "You can put your business cards and your addresses in my coat pocket. No one has to know. I don't want your business card, Mark. You won't get to first base with me, perv." A few people immediately shook their heads, already expecting Tate to say something outrageous. He wasn't finished. "And for all of you men who now feel emasculated and will never feel like a real man because you won't measure up to my physical attributes and confirmed 9 inches of flaccid manhood attached to these sexy legs of mine," Tate continued dramatically, "I don't feel any pity for you unless it's for your girlfriends." Tate smiled, standing in a seductive pose, completely enjoying the attention and the reactions around the room. "I'm available," Tate said confidently. "Any mornings, evenings until 9 o'clock. After that I have to go home and sleep in my 10,000 count thread sheets and my $80,000 bed." He paused dramatically, letting everyone absorb the ridiculousness of his statement. Tate grinned. "I only fuck whores and bitches once if they're lucky." The room immediately filled with reactions. Susie shook her head, laughing despite herself. "Tate, you really believe your own advertising, don't you?" Andrew laughed. "He doesn't just believe it, he's his own biggest fan." Noah covered his face for a moment, embarrassed. Tate looked completely satisfied with himself. "What confidence is important?" Tate walked up behind Susie and with his usual confidence wrapped his arms around her from behind. The sudden closeness caught her off guard and she immediately felt her face turn bright red. Susie could tell from the way he held himself that Tate was being deliberately playful, making sure she noticed his attention. It was the kind of teasing confidence that was so characteristic of him, half joking, half testing the reaction he could get. She rolled her eyes, but the embarrassment was obvious. Tate seemed to enjoy how easily he could make her flustered, while Susie tried to pretend his teasing didn't affect her. Tate stood in the middle of the living room with his arms locked tight around Susie, pulling her back flush against his chest while the whole family watched. His mother, father, Uncle Joey, Uncle Tim, Noah, Jack, Anna, and Bree all froze in place, eyes widening at the sudden closeness. Susie's face flushed deep red, her cheeks burning as she felt every inch of Tate pressing into her from behind. Tate shifted his hips forward deliberately, grinding his crotch right up against Susie's ass in a slow, unmistakable motion. He kept the motion steady, making sure everyone could see exactly what he was doing. Susie's body tensed instantly, her shoulders locking up while a nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, stop it, Tate," she said, the words coming out half laughing even as her voice shook. She tried to wiggle forward, but Tate held her there, his arms keeping her pinned lightly against him. The room stayed dead silent except for the faint sound of fabric shifting and Susie's awkward giggle. Noah sat on the couch right next to Andrew, his eyes locked on the scene. Jealousy twisted hot in his stomach as he watched Tate use Susie's body to send that message to everyone watching. Noah wished it were him standing. Scene retracted, read extended version on Wattpad. The family members around the room reacted in different ways. Tate's mother turned her head sharply, mouth tightening. His father cleared his throat loudly. Uncle Joey shifted in his chair, looking anywhere but at the pair in the center of the room. Uncle Tim's eyebrows shot up while Jack, Anna, and Bree all stared openly, some with open disgust and others with stunned silence. The ornaments on the Christmas tree caught the light and reflected tiny, distorted images of the scene back at everyone. Noah's jealousy only grew stronger with every passing second. He imagined Tate turning that same grinding motion on him, using his body as the example of how sexually available Tate was. The fantasy shattered. Tate's mother's voice cut through the room, yanking Noah back to reality. His cock was rock hard, straining painfully in his pants from the interrupted scene. "Totem Joseph Cornelius Blue." He straightened slightly. "Yes, Talia," Tate smirked at his mother. "Enough." Tate smiled. "Fine." Tate pouted, pulling his clothed crotch off of Susie's bottom. Susie was laughing, she thought it was funny. Tate smirked at everyone, giving the guests the idea that he was demonstrating like a show pony his sexual prowess and availability. Nobody believed Tate was actually finished, but for the moment, the Christmas gathering continued with everyone laughing at the one thing they could always count on. Tate being Tate. The room went quiet for a second. Then came the reactions. Susie rolled her eyes. Tate, you really do wake up every morning and choose chaos. Andrew laughed. He has been waiting all night to say that. In one last attempt to draw everyone's attention, Tate leaned into his usual theatrical confidence and exaggerated his playful behavior by thrusting his pelvis suggestively in the air. His antics immediately caught the room off guard, and Anna and Jack both turned bright red, embarrassed by how determined he was to make himself the focus. Noah looked away, staring down at the floor as he tried to ignore the complicated reaction it stirred in him. Tate had always had a way of commanding attention without even trying, and sometimes Noah found himself caught between amusement, embarrassment, and feelings he didn't always know how to handle. Even in a crowded room, Tate had a way of making it feel as though everyone's eyes were drawn back to him. Noah just shook his head, embarrassed but unable to completely hide his amusement. Tate, you're impossible. Tate leaned back with the confidence of someone who believed he had just delivered the greatest speech of the evening. Talia looked over at him. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue. He immediately knew that tone. What? Enough. Tate smiled. Fine. Everyone knew that fine from Tate rarely meant he was actually done. But for the moment, the Christmas party continued, filled with laughter, teasing, and the unmistakable realization that wherever Tate went, things were never going to be boring. Tate walked toward the staircase to go upstairs when his mother looked in his direction. Where are you going? Talia said as Tate started walking toward the stairs. We're about to have dinner. Tate stopped and looked back at her. Well, you'll have to wait. Talia raised an eyebrow. Wait for what? I have business to conduct. What kind of business? Talia asked. It's Christmas Eve. Tate gave her a mischievous smile, clearly enjoying the opportunity to make everyone uncomfortable. I have a situation to handle, Mother. Talia stared at him. Tate. He laughed. I'm going upstairs. I have a stiffy in my pants and I need to take care of it before I can eat the ham you so kindly prepared for the family. Do you want to come upstairs and hold it while I jerk off, or do you want to wait down here and play hostess? Tate added with a grin, knowing exactly how ridiculous he sounded. Talia immediately shook her head. No. Tate smiled, satisfied that he had gotten the reaction he wanted. Unless anyone wants to come upstairs with me in the bathroom, I'll be down in 10 minutes. Talk among yourselves, but I'm sure to be the center of everyone's topics. Don't be too hard on yourselves while I'm gone. Pun intended. Tate Joseph Cornelius Blue, Talia said, warning him. Tate laughed and continued upstairs. Everyone in the room watched him leave. Noah sighed. Does he ever stop? Andrew shook his head. No, I don't think that's in his personality. Susie laughed quietly. Dinner hasn't even started yet, and somehow Tate has already caused enough chaos for an entire evening. Talia simply looked toward the stairs. He's lucky I love him. And everyone in the room knew exactly what she meant. Noah watched Tate disappear up the stairs, and for a moment he considered following him. It wasn't because he wanted to interrupt him. It was because, deep down, Noah always wanted to be closer to Tate. He wanted to be the person Tate trusted, the person Tate allowed near him when he wasn't performing for everyone else. Noah knew Tate better than almost anyone. He knew the confidence, the jokes, and the exaggerated personality were only one side of him. There was another side that Tate rarely showed, the side that needed comfort, reassurance, and someone who understood him. But Noah also knew Tate's boundaries. If Tate thought Noah was invading his sexual privacy, Tate wouldn't see it as affection. He would see it as a challenge, and knowing Tate, that could quickly turn into anger. Noah stayed where he was. He took a seat at the table with everyone else. The room slowly settled as they waited for Tate to finish whatever he was doing upstairs and come back down for dinner. Talia looked around at everyone gathered together on Christmas Eve and smiled. Before we eat, she said, I think we should say a prayer of thanks. Everyone bowed their heads. Talia began speaking softly, thanking everyone for being together, for friendship, family, and the memories they had shared. But as she spoke, the sounds from upstairs made the moment slightly more difficult to ignore. Talia's mom stood at the head of the long dining table, hands clasped in front of her, voice steady and warm as she led the family prayer. "We thank you for this Christmas gathering, for the food on our table, for the health of our children and the love that binds us all together. Bless this home and keep every soul safe from Tate's temptation and sin." Her words carried through the downstairs rooms, soft murmurs of agreement rising from the uncles and cousins seated around her. The scent of roast turkey and cinnamon rolls still lingered in the air. She paused for a breath, eyes closed, continuing the prayer with quiet devotion. Upstairs, the bathroom door stood half open. Tate had his back against the tiled wall, pants shoved down to his ankles, no underwear in sight. Scene retracted, read extended version on Wattpad. Downstairs, Talia faltered mid-prayer. Her eyes snapped open, cheeks flushing deep red as the unmistakable sounds filtered through the ceiling. The uncles exchanged uncomfortable glances. One cleared his throat loudly, trying to drown out the noise. She pressed on with the prayer, voice slightly strained. And protect us from all materialistic distractions." In the living room, Susie froze with a cookie halfway to her mouth. Andrew's smirk returned, wider this time as he tilted his head toward the ceiling. Is Tate jerking off up there?" he whispered, eyes sparkling with amusement. Susie made another gagging sound, face twisting in disgust. "Oh my God, gross, right now, during Christmas?" She covered her ears but couldn't stop listening to the wet strokes and Tate's filthy monologue drifting down. Noah stood rigid near the fireplace, fists clenched at his sides. His jaw tightened as Tate's voice carried through the vents. Noah's member twitched in his pants despite himself, but a hot wave of envy burned through his chest. Scene retracted, read extended version on Wattpad. "Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, what the hell are you doing?" she hissed, voice shaking with anger and embarrassment. "In the middle of Christmas dinner, I'm praying downstairs, the whole family can hear you, stop it right now." Her hands balled into fists as the sounds continued, her outrage growing with each passing second of Tate's unashamed masturbation echoing through the house. Susie immediately looked uncomfortable and covered her mouth. Andrew tried not to laugh. Noah, however, turned completely red. He stared down at the table, embarrassed, while his thoughts drifted upstairs. He wished he could be the one Tate trusted enough to let into every part of his life. But instead, he sat there quietly, waiting for Tate to come back down and pretending he wasn't thinking about it at all. Downstairs, the prayer stopped cold. Talia stared at the ceiling, face crimson with outrage as the unmistakable sounds of Tate's orgasm carried through every room. "Santa, deliver us from this filth," she muttered, voice cracking. The uncles shifted uncomfortably, one muttering prayers under his breath while others avoided eye contact. In the living room, Susie gagged louder. "Oh my God, he's actually finishing up there, disgusting." Andrew chuckled, shaking his head. Tate wiped his hand on a towel, pulled up his pants without underwear and sauntered downstairs. He slid into his seat at the table, the entire family staring in stunned silence. Susie slammed her hand down. "Tate, you're gross and so loud." Tate grinned, reaching over to rest his hand on Noah's thigh in a completely platonic way. "Well, I came and I haven't washed my hands since I jerked off," he announced casually. The entire family dinner erupted in groans of disgust and embarrassment, chairs scraping as people shifted away from the table. Uncle Joey stared at Tate, shaking his head in disapproval but marveling at his nephew's gull and lack of shame. Andrew seemed to be enjoying himself during the meal. He was seated between Uncle Tim and Uncle Joey, two of Tate's uncles, who were deep in conversation about finances, medical care, and the charitable organizations Talia was involved with that month. Joey held a degree in finance and business, while Tim had similar qualifications but was far more interested in conglomerate holdings and offshore investments. Their discussion quickly became so technical that almost no one else at the table could follow it. Although Noah also had a degree in business and was perfectly capable of joining the conversation, he had little interest in the subject. Instead, he turned his attention to Anna and Susie, chatting with them about art history, a topic they all genuinely enjoyed. Joey was politely bragging about one of his latest business successes. He described how he had orchestrated the takeover of two corporations in Paris by quietly buying up enough shares to gain control before selling them for an astronomical profit. The deal had earned him millions, which he reinvested in several hotel chains throughout the United Kingdom. Tim mentioned that his investments in South America and the eastern United States were performing exceptionally well. He had recently purchased a new condominium in New York City and invited Talia to come visit the following summer. Outside, Los Angeles still carried a slight winter chill. Even though there was no snow, the temperature hovered around 51 degrees, making for a cool evening. Andrew's goal was that, by the age of 30, he would open his own mental health clinic in downtown Los Angeles. He envisioned a practice that would serve people from every walk of life, from affluent families to those living below the poverty line, with a special focus on orphaned children and other minors who desperately needed access to mental health care and community resources. A top student in his field, Andrew had earned several academic grants to continue his education at UCLA in Los Angeles, one of Southern California's leading institutions for psychology. He had also received 2 grants from the state of California to help fund his studies. His application was strengthened by outstanding letters of recommendation. Joey, who had graduated from UCLA nearly a decade earlier with a business degree and high honors, wrote one of them. Another recommendation came from OP, who spoke highly of Andrew's intelligence, compassion, and work ethic. Andrew's academic record spoke for itself. He came highly recommended, and among his peers from Brown University, only the class valedictorian Noah had graduated with higher academic distinction. As the evening went on, the house was filled with good food, laughter, and the occasional embarrassing moment, usually caused by Tate and his notoriously crude sense of humor. Despite his antics, everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Most of the friends and relatives connected to Tate had also grown close to Noah over the years, creating a warm, familiar atmosphere around the table. Across the room, Anna, Susie, Bree, Jack, and Andrew chatted about art, creativity, and the classes they had taken. Although most of them had already completed their university degrees, Anna and Susie still attended daytime classes at a downtown community arts center, where they studied under and learned from several well-known Southern California painters and artists. Anna had recently achieved an exciting milestone. She had been accepted into her first group art exhibition, where her work would be displayed alongside that of 3 other local artists at the community center. Susie, however, was still struggling to find a gallery or exhibition willing to showcase her paintings. Seeing her disappointment, Joey smiled reassuringly. "I know a few people around town," he said. "I'll make some calls and put in a good word for you. Your work deserves to be seen." As the conversation drifted from one topic to another, Talia and Terrence quietly discussed their plans for a getaway of their own. They were thinking about taking a month-long couples retreat to Aruba in April, just as the weather there would be turning warm and beautiful. With Tate and Noah settled into their own home and doing well on their own, they finally felt comfortable taking an extended vacation together. Talia was especially looking forward to the chance to travel and relax after months of staying busy with family and charitable work. The rest of the family had busy schedules as well. Joey was preparing to leave for Switzerland and Spain in February, where he would oversee the merger of 2 of his conglomerate companies into a larger corporation. Tim had business plans of his own, with a trip to Australia already on his calendar for another international investment deal. Meanwhile, Andrew remained focused on his studies, continuing to work through his graduate school curriculum while the others traveled the world pursuing their careers. Noah noticed Tate and Talia quietly excuse themselves from the table before walking into the living room. Curious, he watched them from a distance without following. Talia reached into her bag and pulled out a blue folder, handing it to Tate. He opened it and briefly glanced back toward the dining room before looking through the contents. Talia spoke to him in a low voice, explaining something Noah couldn't hear. After listening for a moment, Tate simply shook his head, closed the folder, and slipped it into his briefcase. From where he was sitting, Noah could only guess at what it contained. The folder appeared to have come from a lawyer's office or perhaps even a judge's court, but he had no way of knowing for certain. After a moment, Noah turned his attention back to the conversation at the table. He decided it was none of his business. Although he was deeply loved by the Blue family, he reminded himself that legal and family matters were private. If Tate or Talia wanted him to know what was in the folder, they would tell him when the time was right. If they chose not to, he would respect their privacy. Noah noticed a single tear slip down Talia's cheek before she quickly brushed it away with her right thumb, as though she didn't want anyone else to see it. From her body language, it looked as if she was trying to persuade Tate to do something important. Tate listened quietly but eventually shook his head. Although Noah couldn't hear their conversation, he caught a few words by reading Tate's lips. "It's not a good time." A moment later, Tate seemed to add, "He's not in a good place right now, I'll keep checking in, I'll let you know." That was all Noah could make out from across the room. He looked away, deciding not to speculate any further. Whatever Talia had asked of Tate was clearly a private family matter, and Noah respected their privacy enough not to pry. Noah wanted to respect the boundary between himself and the Blue family. In his mind, there was a clear line he was not supposed to cross. The people who had the right to ask questions about private family matters were those who were born into the Blue family, married into it, or officially adopted into it. If Joey or Tim wanted to ask what was happening, that was their place to do so. But Noah was a Lunas, not a Blue, and he understood the importance of respecting family privacy and social expectations. Being loved by a family did not mean he was entitled to every private conversation they had. A few minutes later, Tate and Talia returned to the dining room. Talia apologized for being away so long, taking her place again as the gracious hostess. Joey glanced over as Tate quietly placed his briefcase beside the front hall closet where the guests' coats had been stored. Talia still appeared shaken, but she quickly composed herself, putting on the calm, polished demeanor everyone knew so well. "Why don't we move into the living room?" she suggested with a warm smile. "There are drinks and some snacks for anyone who wants them. I put out a little buffet with bread and a few other things. Nothing too spectacular, I know everyone is still full from the catered dinner." Everyone followed Talia into the living room, where the atmosphere slowly shifted back toward conversation, laughter, and the comfort of a family gathering together. Tim began entertaining everyone with funny stories from the Blue family's past, sharing memories filled with adventure, family traditions, and moments that had become legendary over the years. One story he loved telling involved a dinner Talia and Terrence had hosted on Tate's 2-year-old birthday. The event had been held in their New York City townhome and was attended by several major Hollywood celebrities, along with the governor. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion, with more than 150 place settings arranged for the elaborate gathering. Tim laughed as he explained that Tate, being only 2 years old at the time, had not been allowed to attend the dinner. The evening started well after his bedtime, so everyone assumed he would sleep through the entire event. They were wrong. During dinner, the governor had been telling a story, carefully avoiding politics because his wife had insisted that the evening remain free of controversial discussions. Instead, he had moved on to lighter topics, including a joke about golf. He never got to finish it. Right in the middle of the conversation, little Tate appeared at the top of the staircase completely naked. He proudly announced to his mother that he had finally used the potty all by himself without being reminded. The entire room went silent. Talia, mortified but trying to remain composed, immediately excused herself and hurried upstairs with her very proud and very unclothed little boy. Meanwhile, the governor simply sat there, stunned. His unfinished golf joke remained hanging in the air, never reaching its punchline. Years later, Tim still insisted that it was the only joke he had ever heard that completely disappeared before anyone found out how it ended. Tim continued the story, still laughing about the infamous dinner where 2-year-old Tate had made an unforgettable appearance in front of the governor and a room full of Hollywood guests. "After that little dining room fiasco," Tim said, "Talia went shopping with her friends around 9 o'clock that night while everyone else retired to the living room. You have to understand our family has a lot of traditions, rites of passage and things like that." At the mention of rites of passage, Tate suddenly choked on his water, accidentally spraying it across the white tablecloth and bringing the story to an immediate stop. "Are you all right over there?" someone asked. "I'm fine," Tate managed to say between coughs. Once the moment passed, Tim continued as if nothing had happened. "Anyway, our family has always believed in tradition. Many of us have been members of various exclusive clubs and organizations throughout Southern California. When I was 13, I joined one of the most prestigious clubs on the Pacific Coast. Tim leaned back, clearly enjoying his own story. Of course, there was a lot of paperwork, interviews, and a few unusual initiation traditions. I remember one challenge where someone supposedly had to stand on a roof holding an antenna during a hailstorm. The room reacted with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. I passed, of course, Tim said proudly. Although I did get struck by lightning, still, I think it was worth it. He laughed at his own memory, and several people around him joined in. Across the room, however, Tate did not laugh. He looked increasingly uncomfortable, though no one seemed to notice. He stayed quiet, letting the conversation move on around him. Terrence smiled as he remembered the old days. When my father was alive, we used to get all the men together at the house in New York City, he said. We'd play beer pong or whatever the more expensive, more elaborate version of beer pong was for our crowd. The room laughed as Terrence continued. The rules were simple. If you missed a shot and didn't get the ball into the red Dixie cup, you had to pay $50 for every missed ball. Needless to say, some of our guests walked away from those parties with much lighter wallets. He shook his head, amused by the memory. One night, the mayor ended up losing $20,000 because he got so drunk he couldn't land a single shot. He kept insisting he was still perfectly capable, but the cups seemed to disagree. The room erupted in laughter as Terrence finished the story, enjoying the absurdity of the memory and the way family legends seemed to grow with every retelling. Noah had been quietly observing the room throughout the conversation, but he couldn't ignore the change that came over Tate. At first, everyone had been laughing and enjoying the stories about family traditions, old parties, and the unusual customs that had become part of the Blue family history. The atmosphere had been lighthearted, almost nostalgic. But as the conversation shifted towards certain clubs and private organizations, Noah noticed something different. Tate stopped participating in the conversation entirely. The humor that usually came so naturally to him disappeared. His posture became more rigid, his expression more guarded, and he seemed to be carefully listening while also wishing he could disappear from the room. Noah had known Tate long enough to recognize when something bothered him. Tate could be loud, unpredictable, and impossible to embarrass in ordinary situations. He was the person who could make an entire room uncomfortable and then laugh about it afterward. But this was different. This wasn't embarrassment or annoyance. Tate looked genuinely uneasy. Terrence, however, seemed completely unaware of the effect his words were having. There was this one club, Terrence said with a proud smile, leaning back as though remembering a particularly important chapter of his life. Very, very exclusive. I can't really say much about it, it's private. Tate's father smiled faintly, as if he already knew exactly what Terrence was talking about. But it's called the right of continuation. The moment those words were spoken, Noah saw Tate react. It was subtle, a brief movement, almost too quick for most people to notice. Tate flinched, his eyes shifting away from the conversation. It was the first time all evening that Noah had seen him look genuinely uncomfortable. Terrence continued. Only the most exclusive men on the Pacific Coast are allowed into this club. You have to be invited. It's not something you can simply apply for. I joined when I was very young, and it gave me experience managing my inheritance, building relationships, and understanding how the world works. He smiled proudly. It's like a brotherhood, a network of people who look out for each other. I wouldn't change it for anything. Then Terrence looked around the room. Joey, Tim, and Tate are members too. You remember joining, don't you, Joey? For a brief moment the room seemed to change. Noah watched Joey carefully. A strange expression passed over his face, something between discomfort and concern. His eyes moved toward Tate, almost as if he was checking his reaction rather than answering the question. Joey did not respond. Instead, he simply lifted his glass and took another long drink of water. The silence was noticeable, even though most people seemed to overlook it. Tim, however, smiled and continued the conversation. I remember when I joined, Tim said. Some moments when you're young stay with you your entire life because of how awesome it was. You really can't be a serious businessman without being part of the right circles. These clubs are where connections are made. If you're not involved, you can only get so far. You might reach millionaire status, but you'll never move beyond that level without the right relationships. He spoke confidently, as though explaining an obvious rule of the world. But Joey still didn't answer Terrence's question. He looked back toward Terrence instead, avoiding the subject completely. He kept drinking his water, letting the conversation move around him. Noah looked again at Tate. Tate appeared increasingly uncomfortable. Unlike Joey, who was quietly avoiding the conversation, Tate looked as though he wanted to leave. His jaw tightened, and his attention seemed focused anywhere except on the people discussing the club. Finally, Tate stood up. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "I'm going to use the bathroom." No one questioned him. The conversation continued as though nothing unusual had happened. But no one noticed. Something about the way Tate left the room bothered him. This wasn't the Tate everyone knew, the one who loved attention, who joked without hesitation, who enjoyed shocking people. This was a completely different side of him. After a moment, Noah followed at a respectful distance. He wasn't trying to intrude or demand answers. He simply wanted to make sure Tate was all right. Whatever the club called the right of continuation was, Noah could tell that it carried a weight for Tate that no one else in the room seemed to understand. I looked over at Tate's empty seat just as Joey caught my attention. He gave me a small wink, almost as if he understood what I was thinking. Without saying anything, I quietly got up and followed Tate upstairs, making sure to keep some distance between us. I didn't want to make him feel like I was chasing after him or invading his privacy. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. Tate walked down the hallway, entered his bedroom, and closed the door behind him. A moment later, I heard the lock click. I stood there for a few seconds before gently knocking. "Tate, are you okay?" I asked. There was a pause. I could hear movement inside, the sound of him shifting around on the mattress. "I have a migraine," he answered. His voice sounded tired. "Nothing's wrong, you can go back downstairs." I stayed where I was. From everything I knew about Tate, I couldn't simply walk away. The stress of the evening, the crowded room, and the conversation about the club all seemed like they had taken a toll on him. I wondered if the pressure had triggered one of his migraines. And with Tate, migraines were not something to ignore. If he didn't lie down and take care of himself, there was always a chance the headache could worsen and lead to a seizure. "I don't think you should be alone," I said through the door. "Whenever you get these migraines, they can turn into seizures. I don't want you falling or getting hurt." "I'm fine," Tate replied. There was a firmness in his voice, not anger exactly, but a clear request for space. "I want to be alone, I'm taking a business call." I stood silently outside the door for a moment, unsure what to say. I knew Tate valued his independence, but I also knew him well enough to recognize when something was bothering him. Still, I respected his words and stepped away, even though my concern hadn't disappeared. I turned around to head back downstairs, still thinking about Tate, when I walked straight into Uncle Joey's chest. We collided with enough force to make both of us stop. "Oof," Joey said, stepping back. He looked down at me for a moment before breaking into a grin. "Do we need to exchange insurance information?" he joked. I couldn't help but smile and shake my head. "I'm fine if you are, I just came up to check on Tate." Joey's expression softened. "Does he have a migraine?" he asked. I nodded. "I could tell during dinner that something was off with him," Joey said quietly. "Sometimes when there's a lot of people, noise, and activity around him, he can get overwhelmed." He glanced toward Tate's door, his expression becoming more serious. "Go back downstairs," Joey said. "I'll take care of it." I hesitated for a moment, but Joey seemed confident. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small skeleton key. Without saying anything else, he unlocked the door and stepped inside to check on Tate. I found my place again in the living room, settling into a comfortable spot on the couch facing the bay windows. The conversations continued around me, but my attention kept drifting upstairs. A few minutes passed before I heard movement coming from the direction of Tate's room. At first, it was just muffled sounds. Then came a louder noise, a heavy stomping from upstairs. It sounded like someone packing back and forth, and from the tone of the voices I could barely make out, it seemed like Tate was upset. I immediately worried that the stress from the evening had caught up with him. The crowded room, the conversation, and whatever had happened upstairs all seemed to be overwhelming him. Joey was probably trying to help, but knowing Tate, I suspected he didn't want anyone stepping in. I stood up, ready to go check on them, when suddenly Tate's bedroom door opened with a loud bang. There was a brief moment of commotion. Then the door slammed shut again. From downstairs, it sounded as though Joey had been forced back out of the room. A moment later, Joey appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked unusually flustered, one hand covering his nose. He didn't say much as he walked past everyone, his head tilted back slightly and headed toward the kitchen. The room grew quiet for a moment as people glanced in his direction. It looked like whatever had happened upstairs had ended with Joey getting hurt. From the way he was holding his nose, it appeared Tate had struck him. Noah stood there, concerned and uncertain. Whatever was happening behind that bedroom door was clearly more complicated than anyone downstairs understood. "Don't mind me," Joey said, keeping his head tilted back as he walked into the kitchen. "Excuse me," Talia said quickly, standing up to help him. I could hear the freezer door on Talia's refrigerator open, followed by the sound of ice being collected. From the noise, it seemed Joey was putting together an ice compress for his nose. A few minutes later, Joey returned to the living room with an ice pack pressed against the bridge of his nose. Despite what had happened, he tried to make light of it. "Nothing to worry about," he said. Everyone looked at him with concern. "I was just trying to help my nephew," Joey explained. "He was having a seizure and I was trying to help him off the floor. He didn't want me near him. He told me to mind my own business, kicked me in the balls and then hit me in the kisser." The room went quiet. Joey sighed, still holding the ice pack to his face. Talia looked upset, not only because Joey was hurt but because of the situation itself. "He's going to have to learn that he can't react that way," she said. "One of these days he's going to hit the wrong person and there are going to be serious consequences." Noah listened silently, realizing that what had happened upstairs was much more complicated than a simple argument. Tate's reaction, Joey's concern, and the family's frustration all seemed connected to years of struggles that most people in the room didn't fully understand. Terrence sat quietly, appearing to agree with Joey. The mood in the room had shifted from concern to frustration, and the earlier laughter from the evening was gone. "He can be a bully," Terrence said. The words hung heavily in the room. "Did you hear what happened when he was in high school?" Terrence continued. "The fights he got into, the trouble he caused. I heard about the incident with those kids he suspected were gay. People were seriously hurt." Noah listened silently, feeling the weight of the accusations being brought into the open. Terrence continued. "And it's not just the past. I recently heard he's been threatening one of Noah's friends, Mark. Mark was calling the house all the time. The things I heard Tate saying to him were awful, threats about what he was going to do to him, things no one should say to another person." Joey nodded slowly, still holding the ice pack against his nose. "That's the problem," he said. "He can't keep responding to everything with anger." Everyone looked toward Talia. "Why are you allowing this?" Tim asked. "Why aren't you teaching him that this isn't acceptable?" Talia remained quiet for a moment, clearly affected by the criticism. The room that had started as a joyful family gathering had turned into something much heavier, a conversation about Tate's behavior, his struggles, and the fear that the people who loved him had about what might happen if things continued this way. "I did my best," Talia said quietly. Her voice carried a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. She looked around the room at the people who loved Tate but who were now questioning her choices. "I tried to keep him from having violent outbursts. I tried to give him consequences and teach him accountability. But it's difficult when you're dealing with someone who has significant emotional struggles and difficulty regulating his reactions." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Whenever I tried to discipline him the way you would with most people, his stress levels would become so extreme that it could trigger a seizure. I can't simply push harder and ignore what it does to his health." The room became quiet. "I'm not saying his behavior is acceptable," Talia continued. "I'm saying that every situation with Tate has to be handled differently. I have to balance teaching him responsibility with making sure I don't put him in a situation where his health is at risk." She looked down for a moment. "It's not easy trying to set boundaries with someone who reacts so intensely, but I've spent years trying to find the balance between accountability and keeping him safe." Talia continued explaining that Joey had eventually found a method of reaching Tate that worked better than traditional discipline. When Tate broke rules, got in trouble at school, or showed disrespectful or inappropriate behavior at home, Joey found that the best approach was often to take him out for ice cream and talk with him one-on-one. She explained that Tate had always struggled when confronted by authority figures. The pressure, disappointment, and intensity of a serious conversation could cause him to become overwhelmed and defensive rather than actually listening. When people in authority confront Tate, it causes him to become afraid, which usually spikes or jumpstarts a seizure or migraine. I thought Joey could reach him in a way I couldn't, Talia said. He was his uncle, not just an authority figure. Tate trusted him. Over time, they discovered that a calmer approach produced much better results. Instead of harsh punishment or escalating conflict, Joey would sit with Tate, explain why his actions were wrong, and gently guide him toward making better choices. Sometimes Joey would simply tell him that he was disappointed, Talia said. That affected Tate more than anger ever did. The difference was noticeable. Tate responded to Joey because he didn't feel threatened or attacked. He was able to listen, reflect, and understand the consequences of his actions without feeling cornered. Tate's behavior changed dramatically, Talia explained. He didn't get into trouble nearly as often because he wasn't reacting out of fear. He actually wanted to do better. For the family, Joey's approach became the most effective way they had found to balance accountability with understanding Tate's emotional and neurological struggles. Noah had seen the changes in Tate over the years. He had watched him slowly become better at expressing his emotions, even if he still struggled at times with controlling his reactions. Tate was not the same person he had been when he was younger. He no longer regularly collapsed into physical tantrums or completely lost control the way he once had. There were still moments when his anger became destructive, times when he would break things or act impulsively, but those moments were less frequent than before. Talia continued speaking, her voice quieter. I understand that now that Tate is an adult, we can't ignore or excuse some of his reactions. The anger, the disrespect, the refusal to take responsibility at times, those are things we still have to address. She looked toward the staircase. But we also have to be realistic. We can't expect Tate to respond exactly like someone who has never struggled with neurological or emotional challenges. That doesn't mean he shouldn't have accountability. It means we have to understand what we're working with. Talia sighed. He is much better than he used to be. I don't know if it was Joey, the way we changed how we approached him, or simply time and maturity. Maybe it was a combination of all of it, but he has improved. She paused before continuing. We're still working with him. The biggest thing is helping Tate understand that anger doesn't have to become aggression. He doesn't have to lash out every time he feels overwhelmed, scared, or frustrated. That's the lesson we're still trying to teach him. Andrew nodded thoughtfully. One of my minors in my master's program is child psychology, he explained. It's a really fascinating topic. If you'd like, I could give you a few of my old textbooks from last semester, Talia. You could look through them and see what interests you. Talia smiled, genuinely curious. That might actually be really interesting, she said. Thank you, Andrew. Uncle Joey tapped Andrew lightly on the sleeve, looking impressed. So when will you finally be done with your degree, Andrew? Andrew smiled and thought for a moment. I started a little over a year ago, he said. The program is usually a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 3, depending on whether you go full-time and how much coursework you take. If I stay on track, I'll be halfway through in just a few months, which will be nice. He leaned back, already thinking ahead. I should graduate by the spring of '93. After that, I want to start working toward my PhD, which will probably take another 5 to 7 years of hard work. Joey nodded, clearly impressed. That's a long road. Andrew laughed softly. It is, but it's worth it. I want to understand people better, especially children, and how their experiences shape who they become. I was an only child, Andrew said, so I've always been interested in understanding how things like birth order affect people. I want to learn more about how family structure, childhood experiences, and early relationships shape someone's personality. He took another sip of his drink before continuing. I'd really like to focus on child psychology and behavioral psychology. There's so much we still don't understand about why people behave the way they do, especially when those patterns start forming early in life. Andrew smiled slightly, clearly excited about his future plans. My goal is to open my own clinic downtown once I finish my master's degree. If everything stays on schedule, I should have it completed in about a year and a half. After that, I want to start putting what I've learned into practice. He picked up his fork and took another bite of his chocolate cake. His expression changed almost immediately. This is really good, Talia. Did you get the recipe from the newspaper or something? Talia laughed softly. You remind me so much of Noah when he first came into this house. Andrew looked up curious. The first morning he was here, he was only 4 years old, Talia continued. He looked around the kitchen and asked me, "Do you make the food?" She smiled at the memory. I told him no, that it was a catered service. The chef makes everything from scratch, even the cakes. She pointed toward the dessert. For this one, he used a little bit of boysenberry jam mixed into the chocolate cake batter. That's what gives it that slight tang. Andrew took another bite, concentrating on the flavor. That's what it was, he said. I couldn't figure out what I was tasting. Talia smiled. Now you know. Let me know when you finish your degree, Uncle Joey said. I might be able to help you get a line of credit to open your clinic. Andrew looked up from his plate, surprised. That would be very kind of you, he said. Joey smiled and leaned back in his chair. I know a few people in the banking district in downtown Los Angeles. Good people, people who understand investing in someone with a solid plan. Andrew listened carefully as Joey continued. I could probably help you get the clinic started, maybe get you financed up to 50% and with a very low interest rate. Andrew's expression softened with appreciation. I really appreciate that, Joey. Starting a clinic is something I've wanted for a long time, but I know it won't be easy. Joey nodded. Nothing worthwhile is easy. The important thing is that you have a goal and you're putting in the work. As Andrew thanked him, Joey briefly glanced across the table at Noah and gave him a small wink. Noah immediately understood. The gesture was subtle enough that nobody else noticed, but Noah knew exactly what it meant. Joey and Noah had already been having private conversations about financing for Noah's own business venture. They had discussed possibilities, plans, and ways to make it happen, but it was still a secret for now. Joey wasn't just offering Andrew encouragement, he was quietly reminding Noah that he hadn't forgotten about him either. For the moment, though, Noah simply smiled and kept the secret to himself. The idle conversation of the Christmas dinner continued for a few more hours. The house was filled with the familiar sounds of laughter, dishes being cleared, and everyone talking over one another about memories, plans, and stories from the past. Eventually, Noah quietly excused himself and stepped into the living room. He wanted a few minutes alone, not because he was unhappy, but because he needed a moment away from the noise. The glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the ornaments, and for a little while he simply stood there enjoying the quiet. That was when something caught his attention. Under the Christmas tree, tucked slightly behind the other presents, was a small package he hadn't noticed before. Noah frowned curiously and reached down to pick it up. The tag had his name written on it. Noah. For a moment, he just stared at it. He hadn't been expecting anything else and he couldn't remember seeing this present earlier. Turning the package over in his hands, he noticed there was a small note attached. He carefully unfolded it. The message was short. To the cute Bond boy, open me up when you're alone. Noah paused. The nickname immediately caught him off guard. It was familiar, playful, and carried the kind of teasing warmth that brought back memories of a different time. He looked down at the little present in his hands, suddenly more curious than before. Whoever had left it there knew exactly how to get his attention. Noah carefully opened the package. Inside was a small box only about twice the size of a ring box. For a moment he wondered what could possibly fit inside something so small. He lifted the lid slowly, almost expecting something simple. Instead he found a necklace. The pendant was a delicate yellow rose. Noah stared at it for a moment, caught off guard by how carefully it had been chosen. The rose was small but detailed, with tiny petals folded into the shape of a flower. He turned it over in his fingers and noticed a tiny latch on the pendant. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a miniature compartment containing a tiny scrap of paper folded neatly inside. Noah carefully pulled it out and unfolded it. There was only one word written on it. Jealousy. He stared at the word, confused. It wasn't a long message. There was no explanation, no signature, no hint about why that particular word had been chosen. Just one word sitting there carrying more meaning than the size of the paper suggested. Noah looked back down at the yellow rose necklace, turning it over in his hands. A gift was supposed to bring clarity. This one only created more questions. Why a rose? Why yellow? Why that word? And most importantly, who had left it for him? Noah was still staring at the tiny piece of paper when he suddenly felt familiar arms wrap around him from behind. He froze for a moment. Tate stood behind him, leaning close with the same effortless familiarity he had always carried. His chin nearly rested against Noah's shoulder as he looked down at the open box in Noah's hands. "Are you trying to sneak a peek at gifts and then rewrap them?" Tate teased. Before Noah could respond, Tate kissed his cheek playfully. Then Tate noticed what Noah was holding. "What's that?" Noah glanced back at him. "It's not from you." Tate looked genuinely surprised. He shook his head. "No, not from me." He reached around slightly, looking at the necklace. "It's pretty," Tate said. "Maybe my mom got it for you." Noah looked back down at the yellow rose pendant. The suggestion made sense. Talia had always been thoughtful with gifts, and she knew Noah well enough to choose something meaningful. But the tiny note still bothered him. Jealousy. One word. One strange clue. Noah closed the pendant carefully and held it in his palm. Tate watched him for a moment, his expression curious. "You okay?" Noah hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I just wasn't expecting it." Tate smiled faintly and squeezed him once before letting go. "Well, whoever it is from, they picked something nice." Noah looked back at the tree, the lights reflecting off the ornaments and the small necklace in his hand. Something about the gift felt familiar. But he couldn't quite place why. The landline suddenly rang, cutting through the conversation in the dining room. Talia looked over and reached for the receiver. "Hello, this is Talia. You've reached the Blue House. How can I help you?" She listened for a moment, her expression shifting slightly. "Oh, just one moment." Talia covered the mouthpiece and looked toward Noah. "Noah, it's for you, it's a woman." Noah walked over and took the phone. "Hello." The voice on the other end sounded professional and familiar. It was a woman from the bank calling to discuss some paperwork. Noah relaxed slightly as the conversation continued. For several minutes he talked through details, answered questions, and clarified a few things. Eventually he thanked her and hung up the receiver. The moment the phone settled back into its cradle, it rang again. Noah frowned. That was unusual. He picked it up. "Hello." Silence. Noah waited. "Hello," he repeated. Nothing. At first he thought the caller had accidentally disconnected, then he heard it. A faint sound in the background. A glass clinking. Noah's expression changed. He knew that sound. The silence on the other end wasn't accidental. It was the same unsettling pattern as before, the caller who never spoke, who only listened, who left behind just enough evidence to make Noah feel watched. His grip tightened slightly around the receiver. The creepy caller was back. "I don't know who you are," Noah said, his voice becoming sharper, "but I want you to stop calling." The silence on the other end only made his frustration grow. "Stop calling me," he yelled. "What do you want? What did I do? Why do you keep calling me?" His hand tightened around the receiver. "Leave me alone, I'm not bothering anyone." For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Then Noah heard it again. Someone is drinking on the other end. The faint sound was deliberate enough that it made his stomach tighten. The caller wasn't speaking, wasn't answering, wasn't explaining anything. They were simply there, listening. Noah waited, hoping the person would finally say something. Instead, another sound came through the line. A radio is being turned on. The sudden burst of background noise replaced the silence. Noah could hear the faint sound of music playing somewhere in the distance, but the caller still didn't speak. It felt less like a conversation and more like a message. Whoever was on the other end wanted Noah to know they were there. And that was what unsettled him most. The song coming through the telephone was unmistakably from the 1980s. It was one of those songs that seemed to exist everywhere during that era, on radios, in stores, and playing in the background of everyday life. Noah listened carefully. He had heard it before. He was certain of that. The familiarity of it made the call feel even stranger. It wasn't just a random sound coming from the other end of the line. The caller had deliberately turned on the radio while Noah was listening, allowing the music to fill the silence between them. Noah stood completely still, the receiver pressed against his ear. Why this song? Why now? The questions raced through his mind. The caller had refused to speak, refusing to give Noah a name, a reason, or even a single word of explanation. Instead, they communicated through sounds, the drinking, the silence, and now the music playing in the background. Noah tried to place where he had heard it before. A memory flickered somewhere in the back of his mind, but it wouldn't fully come forward. The strangest part wasn't the song itself. It was the feeling that came with it. The feeling that whoever was on the other end knew something about him. Knew what would catch his attention. Knew what would make him stop and listen. Noah's voice lowered. Who are you? For a moment, there was only the sound of the song playing through the receiver. Then the line exploded in song. Obsession, song by Animotion. You are an obsession, you are an obsession. I cannot sleep, sleep. I am a possession, I am your possession. Unopened at your feet. There's no balance, there is no balance. No equality, no equality. Be still, be still. I will not accept defeat, accept defeat. I will have you. Yes, I will have you. I will find a way and I will have you. Like a butterfly. A wild butterfly. I will collect you and capture you. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. I feed you, I drink you. My day and my night. I need you, I need you. By sun or candlelight. You protest, you want to leave. Stay, oh, there's no alternative, there's no alternative. Your face appears again. I see the beauty there. But I see danger. Stranger, beware. Of circumstance in your naked dreams. Your affection is not what it seems. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. My fantasy has turned to madness, has turned to madness. And all my goodness has turned to badness, has turned to badness. My need to possess you has consumed my soul. My life is trembling, I have no control. I will have you. Yes, I will have you. I will find a way and I will have you. Like a butterfly. A wild butterfly. I will collect you and capture you. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. You're my obsession. Who do you want me to be? To make you sleep with me. You are an obsession. Noah listened as the song continued playing through the telephone receiver. The lyrics carried a feeling he couldn't ignore, an intense fixation, a fascination that had gone beyond ordinary attraction and into something consuming. The narrator sounded captivated by someone to the point where emotion seemed impossible to control. The song blurred the line between desire and obsession, between wanting someone and becoming unable to see them as anything other than the focus of your attention. Noah stood silently listening. The choice of song unsettled him. It wasn't just that the caller had turned on a radio. It was the fact that they had chosen this song and allowed Noah to hear it without saying a single word. The caller had communicated through silence, sounds, and now a message hidden inside music. Why this song? Why him? Noah's mind searched for a connection. He thought about the strange calls, the silence on the other end, the sound of someone drinking, and now this song playing deliberately through the line. It felt intentional. Like the caller wanted him to understand something without ever having to say it out loud. Noah tightened his grip on the receiver. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly, though he already suspected he wouldn't get an answer. The music continued in the background. The caller remained silent. And somehow, that silence felt more unsettling than any words could have been. The meaning behind the song made Noah even more uncomfortable. It wasn't simply a song about attraction. It was about a person, a stalker whose feelings had crossed a dangerous line, a romantic rival or someone with a fixation who couldn't accept that they couldn't have the person they wanted. The obsession wasn't based on mutual connection. It was rooted in jealousy, longing, and an unhealthy desire to possess someone. The person being pursued was treated almost like a beautiful object rather than a person with their own choices and feelings, like a butterfly someone wanted to capture and keep, not admire and let remain free. Noah sat there with the phone pressed against his ear, listening to the lyrics echo through the receiver. A thought began forming in his mind. Was this why the caller had chosen this song? The caller hadn't said anything directly. They had never given Noah a name, never explained why they kept calling, but the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. The silence. The strange sounds in the background. The deliberate choice of music. Noah felt a knot forming in his stomach. Was the caller trying to tell him something? Was this their way of saying they wanted him, or that they believed they had some kind of claim over him? The possibility made Noah deeply uneasy. For the first time, he felt like he had a clue about what the caller might be trying to communicate. But instead of bringing comfort, the realization only made the calls feel more disturbing. Noah's frustration finally overwhelmed him. The tears came before he could stop them. "Just leave me alone," he whispered into the phone, his voice breaking. "Please." The silence on the other end only made it worse. A moment later, Joey came down from upstairs and immediately noticed something was wrong. Noah was standing there with the receiver pressed to his ear, his face tense, tears running down his cheeks. Joey walked over quickly. "Noah, what's going on?" Noah didn't answer. He seemed too overwhelmed to find the words. Concerned, Joey gently took the phone receiver from his hand. "Hello." He waited. "Hello." Nothing. Then the line went dead. Joey slowly lowered the receiver and looked at Noah. "How long have they been talking to you?" Noah wiped at his face, but the tears kept coming. "I don't know," he said quietly. "They just keep calling." Joey's expression softened. He stepped forward and pulled Noah into his arms. "It's okay," he said. "It's all right, you're okay." Noah leaned into him, exhausted from the fear and confusion that had been building with every call. Neither of them noticed Tate coming out of the kitchen until he saw the scene in front of him. His uncle is holding Noah. Noah was visibly shaken. Tate's expression changed immediately. "What do you think you're doing?" Joey looked up, surprised by Tate's tone. "Noah's upset," Joey said calmly. Tate's face hardened. The anger came quickly. The champagne flute in his hand slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. "I'll take care of it," Tate said. Joey stood his ground. "Tate." But Tate was already moving forward. He pushed past Joey, his attention fixed completely on Noah. He wrapped his arms around Noah, holding him tightly. "It's okay," Tate said, his voice low and protective. "I'm here." Noah stood frozen for a moment, caught between the fear of the calls and the overwhelming familiarity of Tate's embrace. For the first time that night, the phone wasn't the thing holding all of his attention. It was the person standing in front of him. Joey stepped forward, still trying to calm Noah down. "I was just trying to help," he said. Tate immediately stiffened. "Go away, Joey." The sharpness in his voice made Joey pause. "If Noah's upset, I'm the one who takes care of him," Tate said, "not you." Joey stared at him for a moment, then gave a small, humorless laugh. Tate went on talking, very upset with Joey. "Well, in case you haven't noticed, I'm your nephew." Joey didn't answer, but his expression shifted from frustration to hurt. "You haven't looked at me all night." The comment struck something in Joey. Tate's face tightened and his anger surfaced. "Instead of helping someone who isn't even family," Tate said through clenched teeth, "why don't you focus some of that attention on me for once?" The room went quiet. Joey looked at Tate, realizing the anger wasn't really about him holding Noah. It was about something deeper, something Tate had been carrying but refusing to say. For a moment, Joey looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he stepped back. "Fine," Joey said quietly. He gave Noah a concerned glance, then turned and walked away. A few moments later, Joey went upstairs again, leaving the room behind. Tate remained beside Noah, still holding him, but the tension between the two men lingered in the silence. Once Noah had finally calmed down, the mood of the evening slowly returned to normal. The tension from the phone call began to fade and the guests started gathering their things, preparing to head home. Near the corner of the room, Andrew, Tim, and Joey were still talking. Their conversation had shifted toward business, ideas, and future plans. They seemed completely engaged, discussing possibilities and exchanging advice. Andrew had a reason to be grateful for their help. Earlier that evening, his car had broken down while he was driving to the Blue House, leaving him without a way to get home. Noah and Tate had offered to give him a ride after dinner. During the drive back, Andrew couldn't stop talking about the conversation he had with Tim and Joey. "They really know what they're doing," Andrew said. "The way they think about business, planning, and investments is fascinating. I never really thought about some of those things before." Noah listened from the passenger seat, occasionally glancing toward Tate. Tate was driving, his hands steady on the wheel, but something about his expression seemed different. He wasn't joining the conversation. He wasn't making his usual comments or teasing remarks. He was quiet. Noah watched him from the corner of his eye and noticed the tension in his face. Tate looked focused on the road, but there was something underneath that focus, something restrained. He didn't look angry exactly. He looked unhappy. Andrew continued talking about Tim and Joey, unaware of the change in Tate's mood. Noah looked back at Tate. Whatever was bothering him. Tate wasn't saying. Andrew continued singing Joey's praises during the entire drive. "I've honestly never met someone like him," Andrew said. "I mean, I've met successful people before, but he was genuinely kind. He actually cared about what I had to say." Noah glanced over at Tate, who remained focused on the road. Andrew smiled. "When you mentioned a few years ago that Joey was a playboy, a flirt, and this incredibly sharp businessman and negotiator, I had a completely different picture in my head. I thought I was going to meet someone intimidating." He shook his head, laughing softly. "But the man I met tonight, wow." Andrew paused. "Just wow. If I were a woman, I think I'd marry that one." Noah noticed Tate's expression tighten slightly. Tate didn't respond. A few minutes later, he pulled the car up in front of Andrew's house. Andrew opened the door, then turned back toward them. "Thank you again for the ride, I really appreciate it." "Merry Christmas," Noah said warmly. "Merry Christmas," Andrew replied. "We'll stop by around 9 tomorrow morning to pick you up," Noah added. "We'll drive you back to Talia's house so you can open presents with everyone." Andrew smiled. "Sounds good." He waved goodbye and walked inside. The moment the door closed, the quiet inside the car became noticeable. For a few seconds, neither Noah nor Tate spoke. Then Tate finally broke the silence. "Congratulations," he said. Noah looked over. "What?" Tate stared ahead. "Once Joey finally starts mattering to him, Joey will stop writing him, stop sending him gifts, or making Andrew feel special." His voice carried a bitter edge. "And then he'll just move on and hug someone else or comfort another person instead of treating him like he's Joey's nephew." Noah looked at Tate, caught off guard. He wasn't sure what to say. There was something underneath Tate's words that wasn't just jealousy, it sounded like resentment, like an old hurt that had been sitting there for a long time. But Noah didn't know how to respond. He looked out the window, then back at Tate. The silence between them grew heavier. The car felt strangely small, as though an invisible presence had taken up all the space between them. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. There was an elephant in the room. The drive back to the Green Rambler was almost completely silent. The quiet was so heavy that Noah could hear every little sound, the tires moving over the pavement, the hum of the engine, even the occasional bump in the road beneath them. Usually, a drive with Tate was filled with conversation, teasing, music, or some kind of playful argument. Tonight there was none of that. Noah sat quietly, watching the passing streetlights through the window. Slowly, a realization began forming. Mark wasn't the only person Tate seemed to carry bitterness toward. For years, Noah had assumed Tate's jealousy and resentment were mostly connected to Mark. Mark was the person Tate had openly viewed as competition, the person who seemed to trigger his strongest reactions. But sitting there in the quiet car, Noah began noticing a pattern. Whenever Noah brought up Mark, Tate changed. His tone shifted. His body became tense. His words became sharper. And now, when Noah talked about Uncle Joey, the reaction was strangely similar. It wasn't exactly the same situation, but the emotions underneath felt familiar. There was irritation. There was resentment. There was a sense of possessiveness. As though Tate struggled whenever someone else occupied a place in Noah's life that Tate believed belonged to him. Noah looked over at Tate while he drove. Tate kept his eyes on the road, his expression unreadable. But Noah knew him well enough to recognize the signs. This wasn't just an annoyance. It was something deeper. For the first time, Noah wondered if Mark had never been the real issue. Maybe Mark had only been one example of a much bigger pattern. Maybe anyone who made Noah feel valued, anyone who offered support, attention, or a different kind of connection, could trigger that same reaction from Tate. The thought unsettled Noah. Because if that was true, then Tate's feelings weren't just about losing Noah's time. He was afraid that anyone else might have a place in Noah's life that Tate couldn't control. For some reason, people like Susie, Uncle Tim, Jack, Bree, Anna, Talia, and even Terrence never seemed to create the same reaction in Tate. Noah thought about that carefully. Tate could spend time around them. He could joke with them, talk with them, and accept their place in Noah's life without showing the same resentment or tension. They never seemed to trigger that defensive reaction in him. There was no bitterness. No jealousy. No sense that they were in competition. They were simply people Noah cared about, and Tate seemed able to accept that. But Mark and Joey were different. With them, something changed. Tate acted as though they weren't just people in Noah's life, they were people trying to take Noah away from him. Mark had always been the clearest example. Tate saw him as someone who threatened the closeness they shared, someone who could occupy Noah's attention and emotional space. It wasn't just about Mark being present, it was about what Tate believed Mark represented. And now Noah was beginning to wonder if Joey fell into that same category. It wasn't that Joey was trying to replace Tate. Joey cared about Noah in a completely different way. He was family. He offered support, guidance, and protection without asking Noah to choose between people. But Tate didn't always seem to see it that way. To Tate, certain relationships seemed less like additions to Noah's life and more like challenges to his own place in it. Noah found that confusing because the pattern wasn't about everyone. Tate didn't react this way to everyone who loved Noah. He reacted this way to specific people, people who seemed to give Noah something Tate feared losing control over. Attention. Support. A sense of belonging. A place where Noah could feel valued without Tate being at the center. Sitting quietly in the car, Noah began to understand that maybe the issue was never simply who these people were. Maybe it was what Tate believed they represented. If Noah had been an outsider looking in, someone who didn't know the complicated history between him and Tate, he probably would have come to a very different conclusion. He might have thought Tate was acting like a jealous lover. Whenever a particularly attractive man entered Noah's life, Tate seemed to react as though he wasn't just worried about losing attention, but as though he was about to lose Noah completely. It was as if Tate viewed certain people as threats to his place beside Noah, even when those people had no intention of replacing him. Mark was an obvious example. Mark was charismatic, attractive, and someone who naturally drew attention. Noah could understand why Tate might have felt insecure around him, even if those feelings were never justified. But Joey was different, and somehow that made Tate's reaction even more complicated. Joey had a presence that was difficult to ignore. He carried himself with confidence, had an impeccable sense of style, and seemed like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine. In some ways, Noah could understand why Tate might have reacted strongly to him. Joey reminded people of Tate in certain ways. The same charm, the same confidence, the same ability to walk into a room and command attention. But Joey also offered something different. He was supportive. He was protective. He made Noah feel valued. And perhaps that was what bothered Tate the most. Maybe Tate wasn't simply afraid of losing Noah's attention. Maybe he was afraid that Noah would discover he could receive love, support, and connection from other people, too. Noah wondered if Tate feared Joey would somehow recognize the depth of their bond and challenge the place Tate had always held in Noah's life. Not romantically, but through a different kind of closeness, a paternal, protective relationship that gave Noah another source of security. The strange part was that Joey wasn't trying to take anything from Tate. He wasn't competing. He wasn't replacing him. But Tate seemed to interpret certain relationships as if they were a contest. And Noah was beginning to realize that the competition might have existed mostly in Tate's mind. Joey and Mark represented something very specific. They were other important male bonds that gave Noah support, guidance, and a sense of belonging. Joey was an older brother-uncle figure. He offered protection, advice, and a kind of family stability. Mark was an older brother-mentor figure who offered knowledge, experience, and guidance. Neither relationship was romantic. Neither man was competing with Tate for Noah's affection in that way. But Tate may not have been reacting to the type of relationship. He may have been reacting to the importance of the relationship. If Tate's identity was built around being the person Noah needed most, then another man becoming significant could feel threatening, even if that person filled a completely different role. In Tate's mind, the fear may not have been, Noah is going to leave me for this person. It may have been, Noah has someone else he trusts. Noah has someone else he turns to. Noah has someone else who can make him feel safe. That distinction matters. Healthy relationships allow people to have many sources of connection. A mentor does not replace a partner. A brother figure does not replace a lifelong companion. A father figure does not replace anyone else. Each bond exists for a different reason. But Tate seems to have viewed closeness as a limited resource. If someone else became important to Noah, Tate may have interpreted it as losing something rather than Noah gaining something. That would explain why Mark and Joey triggered him while people like Susie, Anna, Jack, Bree, Talia, and Terrence did not. Perhaps Tate did not perceive them as competing for the same emotional territory. Mark and Joey represented something Tate was especially sensitive about. Other men who could guide Noah, protect him, and become people Noah relied on. The tragedy of that dynamic is that Joey and Mark were not taking anything away from Tate, they were adding to Noah's life. Tate's jealousy in this interpretation was not really about Noah wanting those men. It was about Tate struggling with the idea that Noah could need more than one person. Noah sat in the front passenger seat, looking over at Tate. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the quiet road outside. Tate sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, but Noah could tell he wasn't really looking at anything. His eyes were fixed on some distant point, lost somewhere in his own thoughts. Noah studied him for a moment. "What are you thinking about?" Tate didn't move. He didn't turn his head. He didn't even seem surprised by the question. After a long silence, he finally answered, "Nothing." The word was quiet, almost automatic. Noah frowned slightly. "You want to know about nothing?" Tate remained still. The answer bothered Noah because he knew Tate. He knew when Tate was avoiding something. He knew when there was something underneath the surface that he didn't want to say. The quiet stretched between them. Then Noah finally asked the question that had been sitting in his mind. "Why are you so jealous?" The reaction was immediate. Tate's expression changed. For a moment, Noah thought he might answer. He thought maybe Tate would finally explain what had been bothering him, why certain people seemed to bring out such a strong reaction. But Tate didn't say anything. Instead, he opened the car door. Noah watched in confusion as Tate stepped out. "Tate." No response. Tate walked toward the house and slammed the driver's side door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet driveway. Noah stayed sitting in the passenger seat, stunned. He stared at the closed door, trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't the question itself that confused him. It was how quickly Tate had run from it. Noah leaned back in the seat, his thoughts racing. What did I say? For the first time, he wondered if the question had gotten closer to the truth than Tate was willing to admit. Noah slowly got out of the passenger side of the car. The cold night air hit him as he stood in the driveway. For a moment, he remained there, still trying to process what had just happened. Tate's reaction kept replaying in his mind, the silence, the question, the sudden exit. He turned around, preparing to walk toward the house. That was when bright headlights suddenly flooded the driveway. The sudden glare made Noah instinctively raise his hand, shielding his eyes from the light. He squinted, trying to see past the brightness as another car pulled up and stopped beside him. For a moment he couldn't make out who was inside. The engine went quiet. The driver's door opened. Noah lowered his hand slightly, watching as someone stepped out of the vehicle. The figure stood there for a moment, partially hidden by the headlights, leaving Noah unsure of who had arrived. The quiet of the night suddenly felt different. Noah had been focused entirely on Tate and the argument they had just avoided having, but now his attention shifted to the unexpected visitor standing only a few feet away. "Hello," Noah called cautiously. The person didn't answer right away. They simply stood there, looking toward him. The headlights dimmed slightly, allowing Noah to finally see who was standing in front of him. A man stepped out of the red pickup truck. "You forgot these," Uncle Tim said. Noah looked down as Tim held out a pair of gloves. "I thought you might need them, it's cold tonight." Noah took them, still a little surprised. "Thanks, Tim." Tim smiled and shrugged. "I was driving right past and figured it was a good idea to stop. Didn't want you standing out here freezing." He looked toward the house, then back at Noah. "Sorry about all the drama." Noah gave a small tired smile. Tim chuckled. "Tate can be an asshole sometimes, in case you didn't already know that." The comment caught Noah off guard, but Tim's tone was light enough that it didn't feel cruel. He was trying to make him laugh. Tim stepped back toward his truck. "Well, I'd better get going. Joey and I are supposed to have a drinking game tonight. Whoever is still standing wins." He laughed. "Although, honestly, I don't think either of us will know who won until we wake up tomorrow." Noah smiled faintly. "Take care, Tim. You too, be safe." Tim paused before getting back into the truck. "And Noah, Tate can sometimes get a little unhinged when he feels threatened." Noah looked at him. "What do you mean?" Tim started to answer, but the sentence never finished. Something moved past Noah's ear. A sudden blur. Then a sharp metallic sound cut through the air. Clank. Noah froze. For a moment he didn't understand what had happened. Then he saw Tim stumble. The color drained from Noah's face as Tim lost his balance and fell to the ground. "Tim!" Noah rushed forward, dropping the gloves as panic replaced confusion. The quiet driveway that had felt peaceful only moments before suddenly felt dangerous. Noah looked around, trying to understand what had just happened. Someone was there. Someone had been watching. And now the night had changed completely. Noah froze. For a split second, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Tim was on the ground and Noah could see that he was hurt. The sight of Tate's uncle lying there made everything else disappear, the cold air, the driveway, the sound of the truck still ticking as it cooled. Uncle Tim's forehead split open, and blood poured from the wound as Noah looked up in horror. For a brief moment, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Then he saw Tate. Tate was standing over him, lifting the metal bat again. Noah's heart stopped. The bat came down, the sound echoing through the driveway. Tim collapsed against the ground as Noah instinctively rolled away, trying to get out of the path of the chaos unfolding in front of him. "Tate, stop!" Noah shouted. But Tate didn't seem to hear him. He looked completely consumed, his anger drowning out everything else as Noah scrambled backward, terrified and confused. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't jealousy. This was something Noah never thought he would see. Then Noah looked up. And his heart dropped. Tate was standing there with the metal bat in his hands. Noah couldn't understand what he was seeing. "Tate." The name came out almost like a question, as though saying it would somehow make the scene change. But Tate didn't answer. He looked consumed by anger, moving with a focus that terrified Noah. The person standing in front of him looked nothing like the Tate who had held him moments earlier. Noah backed away instinctively. "Tate, stop." The words barely registered. Noah's fear finally took over and he moved away from the immediate danger, trying to put distance between himself, Tim, and the chaos unfolding in front of him. His thoughts raced. Why? Why would Tate do this? Tim hadn't threatened him. Tim had only stopped to help. He had brought Noah gloves because it was cold, he had joked with him, he had wished him well. There had been no reason. Noah's hands shook as he stared at Tate. This wasn't jealousy anymore. This wasn't an argument. This was something far beyond anything Noah had ever imagined. "Tate," Noah said again, his voice breaking, "what are you doing?" For the first time that night, the question wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about Mark. It wasn't about Joey. It wasn't about anyone else taking Noah away. It was about the terrifying realization that Tate's need to protect his place in Noah's life had become something Noah no longer recognized. Tate struck again and again until Noah finally found the strength to move. "Stop!" The scream came from somewhere deeper than fear. Noah threw himself forward and pushed Tate away, putting himself between Tate and Tim. "Stop, Tate." For a moment, everything went still. The bat lowered. Tate looked at Noah. And that was when Noah saw something he had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't the cold resentment that appeared whenever Tate felt threatened by someone else in Noah's life. It was fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. Tate looked almost horrified by what had happened, as though he had been moving on instinct and only now realized what he had done. His expression wasn't that of someone who had won or someone who felt justified. It was the expression of someone who had been convinced, for one terrifying moment, that he was protecting something he could not bear to lose. Noah stared at him shaken. Because suddenly the pieces came together in a way that frightened him even more. This wasn't about Tim. It wasn't about Joey. It wasn't about Mark. The jealousy, the possessiveness, the anger, all of it seemed to come from somewhere deeper. A fear so intense that Tate had convinced himself he was defending Noah, even when Noah had never asked to be defended. And that realization was more frightening than the anger itself. Because Noah could understand anger. He could understand jealousy. But seeing Tate lose control because of fear made Noah wonder how far that fear could take him. Noah's hands shook as he called the ambulance. For the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about the argument with Tate, the phone calls, or the tension that had filled the house. All of it disappeared the moment he saw Tim lying there. All Noah could think about was keeping himself alive. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over the scene as Noah stood nearby, overwhelmed and unable to process what had happened. Tim was unconscious, badly injured, and unresponsive. Christmas Eve, which had started with laughter, food, and family conversations, turned into a night of fear and waiting. The family spent the rest of the night at the hospital. Tim wasn't simply sleeping. The doctors explained that his condition was serious enough that they placed him in a medically induced coma while they performed tests and treated the swelling and injuries. Noah sat there in the waiting room, staring at the floor, unable to understand how the evening had changed so completely. Hours passed. The doctors continued monitoring Tim's condition, and eventually they needed to perform surgery to address the bleeding and pressure inside his head. The procedure began around 1 in the morning. From 1 a.m. until 4 a.m., everyone waited. Every minute felt endless. Noah sat quietly, replaying the events over and over in his mind. Tim is arriving with the gloves. Tim is joking with him. Tim is telling him to be safe. And then everything changed in an instant. The person who had come to help him was now fighting for his life. When the doctors finally came out after surgery, everyone stood up at once, desperate for answers. The night was far from over, but Noah knew one thing with painful certainty. Christmas would never feel the same again. The doctor finally came out of the operating room around 5 in the morning. The waiting room had grown quiet in the way only hospitals could become quiet. the kind of silence filled with exhaustion, fear, and people holding onto every word they heard. Talia and Terence stood together in the corner. Talia was crying, her hands trembling as Terence held her close. The doctor approached them, and everyone immediately looked up. "It's all right," the doctor said gently. "We were able to drain the fluid and relieve the swelling from Tim's forehead and the side of his brain." A wave of relief moved through the room. The doctor continued. "He was actually fortunate in one way. The wool cap he was wearing, I'm assuming it was a Christmas gift, absorbed a significant amount of the impact. It helped protect him." Talia covered her mouth, tears still falling. "He's going to have a very nasty bump and a long recovery ahead, but right now his condition is stable." The doctor looked at the family. "We're going to keep him here for at least 72 hours to monitor him closely. We want to make sure there are no blood clots, additional bleeding, or any other complications that develop." Everyone listened carefully. "We're also keeping him in a medically induced coma for the next 24 hours to give his brain and body time to heal." Talia let out a shaky breath. "So he's going to be okay?" The doctor nodded. "Right now, we expect him to make a very good recovery." The relief was immediate, but it was mixed with the reality of what had happened. Then the doctor's expression became more serious. "There is a police officer here who would like to speak with Noah." Noah looked up. The words made his stomach tighten. The doctor glanced toward the hallway. "I'm also going to speak with Tate's parents and explain what happened." The room fell silent again. Noah looked toward the hospital doors, knowing that the night was far from over. Tim was alive. That was what mattered. But now there were questions that needed answers. Captain Stottlemyre led Noah into a small room off the hospital hallway. The door closed behind them, muting the sounds of the waiting area. The captain pulled out a chair and sat across from Noah. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Did anything happen earlier this evening that could have caused Tate to fly into what looked like a homicidal rage?" Noah stared down at his hands. "He was jealous," Noah said quietly. "Sometimes he gets jealous." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Jealous?" Noah nodded. "I mean, he's hurt people before. He strangled one of my friends once, but I have never seen him this angry before." Captain Stottlemyre studied Noah carefully, taking in the seriousness of his words. "Is there a history of him becoming violent when he feels threatened?" Noah hesitated. "Not like this." The captain sighed and leaned back slightly. "Well, Noah, Tate is under arrest right now. We're waiting until his uncle wakes up and can make a decision about whether he wants to press charges." Noah swallowed. "Tate's arrested?" "Yes." The captain paused. "We actually had to sedate him." Noah looked up. "What?" "He was extremely agitated," Stottlemyre explained. "He wasn't acting like someone who understood what was happening around him. He was difficult to control." The captain searched for the right words. "Feral might be the word people use, although I prefer to say he was severely distressed and out of control." Noah sat silently. The captain continued. "His mother told us he has neurological issues. She said that when he becomes overwhelmed by stress, he can experience severe headaches, migraines, and sometimes episodes where he reacts violently." Noah looked away. "With baseball bats?" The captain nodded slowly. "Unfortunately, yes. She said there have been incidents where he has damaged things before, usually objects around the house. Furniture, walls, household items." He paused. "But this time was different." The room became quiet. This time he didn't take his anger out on an object. Noah felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Captain Stottlemyre looked at him. "He hurt a person." Noah closed his eyes for a moment. The image of Tim lying on the ground came back to him. The man who had only stopped by to bring him gloves. The man who had tried to make him laugh. The man who had been caught in something he never caused. "I don't understand," Noah whispered. The captain's expression softened slightly. "That's because sometimes understanding why someone does something doesn't make what they did any less serious." Noah sat quietly, knowing that the night had changed everything. Captain Stottlemyre closed his notebook for a moment. "Has Tate had psychotic episodes or violent rages?" the captain asked. Noah shook his head immediately. I don't know. The captain waited. It took 3 officers to hold him down, he said. He was a danger to the people around him. Noah lowered his eyes. He's never hurt anyone until tonight. He gets stressed, can get angry, but he's never seriously injured anyone. The captain nodded thoughtfully. That's important to know. He made another note. Whether this was caused by a medical condition, a mental health crisis, or something else isn't something I can determine tonight. That will have to be evaluated by physicians and, if necessary, mental health professionals. Noah swallowed hard. So what happens now? For now, the captain replied, he remains in custody while everyone involved receives medical attention and we complete our investigation. He paused before continuing. When your uncle regains consciousness, he'll have to decide how he wants to proceed. His wishes will be an important part of what happens next, although some decisions may ultimately rest with the prosecutor depending on the evidence. The room fell quiet. Noah stared at the floor. Nothing about the night felt real anymore. Only a few hours earlier, everyone had been exchanging Christmas gifts and laughing over dinner. Now one man was in the intensive care unit, another was under arrest, and Noah found himself wondering how his family would ever recover from what had happened. On the morning of December 26, Uncle Tim slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he noticed was the dull, throbbing pain behind his forehead. He winced. His head felt impossibly heavy, and a pounding migraine made even the soft hospital lights seem painfully bright. A nurse noticed he was awake and smiled. The nurse handed Tim a glass of water, then adjusted his Roman 4 bag. Welcome back, Tim, don't try to move too quickly. Tim instinctively reached toward his forehead before the nurse gently stopped him.